the challenge, I think, for people is to realize is that AI is forcing change on your sector and your organization and on you, the individual. Therefore, this is as much about change management and therefore about people and mindset as it is about technology. So the first thing is, it is no good at the top of the organization if you don't understand the ramifications, the consequences of that disruption. You cannot just be a leader that takes a can of digital paint and paints over the cracks of the analog cracks of your business, right? It will not survive the disruption that's coming.
Hey, this is Mark Blackwell. Welcome back to the Arkaro Insights podcast. This is the show where we help B2B executives thrive in a complex, adaptive world. I'm your host, and today we are joined by Marco Ryan. Marco is a true veteran of the digital frontline with over 30 years of experience. He's held the reins as Global Chief Digital Officer at BP, leading one of the world's largest digital resets, and has served in senior leadership roles at Wärtsilä, Thomas Cook, and Accenture. He's a seasoned board member and a digital strategist, author of a number of books, including 51 Essential AI Terms for Leaders, as well as something I think we're going to focus more on today, Rewire or Retire, AI for Leaders. Marco, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks very much, Mark. Good to be here.
Great. We've got a lot to cover today, and so I'd love to talk more about the Rewire or Retire philosophy that you've brought in your latest book, and thinking about what this means for organizations in particular, and how they might transform from a sort of a siloed organization to being more customer-centric, and exploring it's just not AI, it's just not the technology, it's fundamentally a reset for how we think about business. Let's see what you say, but I'm expecting something along the lines like that. But if I can just kick things off with a provocation. Last podcast was Niels van Hove, and he talked about how AI is coming into integrated business processes like sales and operations planning and sales and operations execution. And we had a fascinating quote on LinkedIn when we were talking about the podcast. And I think it's worth sharing with you to tee up this podcast what the quote from the reader was. He said, "In my view, there is still a big gap in terms of AI maturity in senior leadership. Every week I receive a call from a consultant claiming they have the magic AI capability that will revolutionize our planning. I think it's all about understanding which are the key decisions that will enable value and working backwards to see how AI can enable augmented decision making." So we're going to dive into the detail, no doubt, but what's just your immediate impression when you saw that?
Well, there's quite a lot to unpack in there, isn't there? I mean, I think the first thing is that, you know, the difficulties for a lot of senior executives, you know, they are, let's be generous, they're sort of nearsighted when it comes to AI, right? I wouldn't quite say they're blind, but they're nearsighted, right? They haven't really understood the what, the if, the how, the implications of it. And so they are dependent. It's a little bit like what happened with digital transformation. They're dependent on experts or people who are more versed in it, more far-sighted in it, to lead them, to help them, whatever. So this is the first challenge, is that most executives their digital intelligence, what I call DQ, is relatively low. Yeah, they've got really good high IQ, otherwise they wouldn't be in a senior position. Let's be honest, most of them, particularly the male ones, overestimate their EQ, and as a result, also we have pretty low, DQ. But I think the challenge is that it's a bit like the Wild West at the moment. There's so many things that AI can do. And I think when you don't know much about it, you tend to grab on to people that come to you with something where they've created a niche or a product or a solution. I mean, cutting to the chase, the short answer is I don't think you need half of them, because actually, AI is something that we can all use and we can all adapt, and we can all adopt, and we can all augment. And so part of my passion, my sort of mission is to lift the scales, if you like, is to, help leaders understand that it isn't that complicated to understand the basics or use it. And B, you don't have to keep buying solutions from third parties who've come to you with sort of everything sort of packaged up. almost without exception, they have not created the AI that sits beneath it. Right. So it's not like it's true thought leadership. It's just sales and marketing packaging. And I think for most people, they want something that's more tailored or more customized. And bluntly, I think you can do that yourself. So I guess if there's one message out of this is, don't be afraid and have a go, because actually I think you'll find it quite liberating what you can achieve, or what your organizations can achieve at little or no cost by just having a go.
Brilliant, thanks. So you mentioned DQ. Can you just help me calibrate, and our listeners calibrate what you mean? Because here's me. So I'm now doing podcasts where many of them cover AI. I'm trying to read bits and pieces. I play around with new tools as they come. And I feel like the more you know, the more there is to know. And I feel like, am I ever really going to get on top of this? I mean, what's the expectation of a leader to have a good DQ?
I mean, the first thing is, what is DQ, and then what's the expectation? I mean, it was a term. I mean, if you Google DQ, you'll find about 5 different people telling you what DQ is, right? But broadly, when Alistair Leckler and I, we wanted a way for non-technical leaders to be able to sort of calibrate where they were in a journey of AI awareness and AI confidence. The DQ, it's a metric, it's a tool, it's a self-assessment tool, but effectively it's a bit like an IQ test. You are marked out of 200. It isn't a straightforward, you answer 200 questions and that's it. It's a series of different things about understanding, about how you use AI. It asks you, it's all about the sort of both the theoretical and the applied. And it basically assesses you against your peers, you can search by sort of sector, by geography, by role. So you can quickly align and see, how do I compare to other CFOs or, chief HR officers? Where do how do I compare to HR officers in the UK versus HR officers in the US? So that the idea is that you are able to sort of benchmark where you are. Now, what's behind it is the need for leaders in the boardroom to become more, well, not just the boardroom, leaders full stop, become more curious, digitally curious. Now, so part of my sort of, I guess, the research out of the book, and part of my sort of passion, is that I don't think that AI and digital is a technical thing. I think it's a leadership issue, right? First and foremost. So yes, it's based on technology and we need the technology to make it work. But really, it's about how people, want to think and evolve and change and do and create value in their companies by using a technology that is AI enabled. So the whole part of the sort of the digital curiosity piece is leaders need to become more curious. I mean, the what if question. What if we were to, right? Not just I wonder if we could, but what if? And the what if needs to be quite disruptive. What if, I worked in a global organization called BP, and there was a startup that did X. What if they were to eat my lunch? Right? So when I look back to my BP days, we were setting up and running UK's largest, electric vehicle charging network, BP Pulse. And, we had a whole series of things to do about the platform and how physical chargers and the app and the user experience. And there was a whole thing we were doing around, what if a startup came in and created something that was better and disaggregated us? That what if question is fundamental to digital curiosity. And most leaders are not digitally curious enough because they are embarrassed, they're frightened, they're worried, they're overwhelmed perhaps by their lack of understanding of AI, and in some cases the technology. In most cases, there's a lack of understanding of the consequences. Great leaders don't need to be deep experts. If you think about people being T-shaped, we don't want everyone to have a deep vertical, technology. That's for the technologists, and you need great technologists. But leaders should be, that vertical bar, horizontal bar across the top, where you are building out your awareness of whether it's, finance or technology or supply chain or HR or customers or whatever it might be. You need that broad skill set. And for me, I think that part of the new skill set you need is to be really digitally curious. You don't need to be the technical expert, but you do need to be able to ask the right questions. And more importantly, you need to understand the consequences of those questions, or the answers to those questions, right? So DQ is a way to shine a light on where are you in that journey, and to try and encourage you to become more curious and to build your knowledge and your confidence to a way that you can lead with authority in a world in which AI is constantly lapping at the shores of your business.
That's great. So curious is a key word for me. Because I think it helps understand. You don't have to know it all, but you're asking the right questions, and knowing it all is an impossible task as the evolution of this technology comes along. Curiosity is good because I think it might hint about the way we need to think about what leaders need to do as facing this wave of AI tsunamis. If I can just remind ourselves and our listeners of some stats that we had from an earlier podcast with Stephen Wonker, who gave about AI and the Octopus organization, and to show the gulf between what leadership currently think they're doing and how the organization is experiencing it. There was a survey that executives think they've got this nailed because 80% of them say our strategy has got AI as our future. Yet in the same companies, only 15% of the employees believe it to be true. They think it's just fluff. So what is it that we've got to try and change in our organization and the way we think about running businesses to help prepare ourselves for what we call the tsunami of what's coming?
I mean, the tsunami, I think, was when we were in our conversation. That was more of I don't necessarily refer to it as that, by the way. I think it's more about the fact that it is pervasive and it's all directions, and you can't stop it. But so I think I think the challenge is that change is about leadership, right? About people. Right? The disruption that AI is causing is an enforced disruption. You have no choice in it. And therefore, in the old days of business, it was very much a push. You build a product and you advertise it, and people either bought or didn't. But you were pushing. That was it. The product was the product. Now we moved into an evolution where we are trying to adapt to customer needs, and we're trying to be much more agile, and our products and services change to adapt to whatever. And those companies that understand the customer needs, and build products that meet the customer needs, are more successful than those that aren't. So the challenge, I think, for people is to realize is that AI is forcing change on your sector and your organization and on you, the individual. Therefore, this is as much about change management and therefore about people and mindset as it is about technology. So the first thing is, it is no good at the top of the organization if you don't understand the ramifications, the consequences of that disruption. You cannot just be a leader that takes a can of digital paint and paints over the cracks of the analog cracks of your business, right? It will not survive the disruption that's coming. The second thing is, of course, you're right, that most of the people in the organization who are deeply familiar with this, who have lived it, breathed it, are at the bottom end of the organization. So, you've got this sort of idea where you almost need to invert that kind of, the pyramid, right? And actually, it plays well to people who are servant leaders, because they are there, they are curious, they are there to serve, to empower, to let others, lead. And where the talent and the curiosity is native, perhaps, around AI is in the larger, lower parts of the organization and the traditional thin top of the pyramid. So this is part of what we found in the book, that this idea that you need to sort of flip almost mentally, I'm not saying literally, but mentally you need to sort of flip the model where actually leaders need to go out and have those micro learning moments, to go and find people, to understand, to explore, to change, to listen to other people in the organization who are perhaps the experts, but don't have the experience or the seniority. What AI does not do well is judgment. Not yet, anyway. I'm sure it will with quantum computing and everything else, but it doesn't do judgment well. So the human in the loop, which we can proxy for human judgment, is integral and a critical part of current AI deployment. And that is a human characteristic, and a lot of judgment is based on experience, right? So there is a role for senior leaders who aren't technically, literate, or who are overwhelmed by AI. There is a role around this kind of, how do I help steward the organization? This is very much the kind of in the Rewire retire analogy, is very much the retire analogy. Retire is not to get the gold watch after 40 years service. It's how do I actually stand back and and deploy my skills to allow others to accelerate through, who are going to lead in this technology sort of age. So change management is a people issue. AI is disrupting an organization. Leadership need to be much more adaptive and open to sort of almost flipping the hierarchy and learning and finding ways to empower and enable the organization so that it isn't just a can of paint where you've got a strategy and, box tick, because as you say, people down the organization where they're actually doing the work will realize that that's just words.
Exactly. It's fascinating. We had Scott Anthony to talk about epic disruptions, and he's, of course, a student of Clayton Christensen and the great author of The Innovator's Dilemma and The Innovator's Solution. And he retold the Bethlehem Steel story, not from the perspective of Nucor, but from the perspective of Bethlehem Steel, and talked about the three ghosts that they were haunted by, and they were just failed to move on from the past, which reminded me of how you think about driving with a rear view mirror. If you can't force yourself out, you're stuck. So the real great leadership moment will become moving from an exploit type mindset, which has worked very well, to being more explore, which means you have to be curious.
Exactly. And I think, you mentioned there briefly rear view mirror leadership. It's one of the things we talk about again in the book. This idea that, and this is not meant to be as critical as it will sound, but for many, many years, organizations, you go into a meeting, and we've all been there, right? And you have 190 PowerPoint slides, of which about 180 are, finance, and most of them are comparisons to the same quarter last year versus this quarter, and it's a useful data point. But in many ways, because the winds of change you could buffet yourself against the winds of change, inside the organization, it was a very useful way to steer the organization. But in a world where, if you just think about in the past year, how much AI has evolved and what is possible and how much it has changed things. And then you're going to sit down in a board meeting and tell me that I've got to look at last year's decisions and last year's environment and try and steer or predict, what I'm doing now or even next year based on that. That idea of, I think I like trying to drive a Formula One car, around a racetrack by just looking at your rear view mirrors. It doesn't hold water. I'm not saying it isn't a valuable input. It is, but it should not be the dominant input that so many CFOs have used it for forever. So that is a fundamental change that you need to find a way in which you can steer and drive your business, which is far more adaptive and far more able to respond to, a constant of disruptive change, which is outside of your control. And that's the bit I think people forget. They feel that they need to control it and therefore they'll do this. And organizations that don't adapt to this will atrophy. You're on a glide path, and the difficulty is that it won't look that dramatic at the moment. And that goes back to this rewire retire, I won't make the changes now on my watch because I've got sort of a couple of years to go and I can steer it and we know what to do. And, the number of times I've heard when I sat in public, companies in the exco or in the boards, I've heard, yes, but Marco, you don't understand the investors, or we've got to steer this for the markets. I do understand that that's how the business is valued and driven. But also those investors are savvy, right? And they're looking and understanding that there is huge disruptive change coming. And if an organization is not ready for it, hasn't prepared for it, hasn't got the right skills, hasn't got the right capabilities, the right technologies, they will die. And what AI is doing is acting almost, and I'm mixing my metaphors, is acting almost like a steroid on the pace of that change or that atrophying. So it's sort of ignore it at your peril. And I mean that as an individual, as a leader, you need to there's a conscious choice you need to make. Am I going to adapt myself and embrace AI and make it part of my leadership skill set? Rewire, or am I basically going to say, no, I'm too old, I've had enough, it's not for me, which is a perfectly rational choice, right? But in which case you have an amazing opportunity to help steer, the organization and provide stewardship around culture, values, experience, insight over that period, which is absolutely fundamental because we need that human judgment. We need that human experience in the loop to make it safe for the others to do the acceleration.
Absolutely. We've reached the conclusion a number of times on this podcast that the need for the old-fashioned skills of human connection and relatedness are only going to become more important, not less important in the future when adopting to AI. So I think we've answered the first question or comment from our LinkedIn guest who kindly shared his thoughts about the importance of leadership and how it connects to his challenge as a senior executive within an organization. Much more transactional. Think about the second comment. He's sitting there responsible for choosing which tools to put into the organization. And every day he's getting bombarded with emails and telephone calls from sales reps of the latest thing to improve his planning. Ultimately, something's got to change, right? But how does he separate the wheat from the chaff? This overwhelming, as you call it, the digital paint potentially. What advice would you give to him on a very transactional basis?
Well, I think the first thing is, what problem are you trying to solve? And I think a lot of people are trying to plug AI solutions into a failed process or a problem that they haven't really addressed the root causes of. And, there's nothing magical about this. It's just old fashioned sort of root cause analysis. What is at the heart of your problem? And, where the worst thing that people can do is to sort of take AI and apply it to a problem without fixing the root cause, because all you're going to do is exacerbate the problem that was originally there, right? Because it'll do it faster, better, quicker, and harder, but your problem doesn't go away. So the first thing I think is, don't be afraid to have a really hard look about where the right place or and that's typically where it is too difficult, or you've failed in the past, or, you're using a lot of exports, but there's a lot of sort of, I've got to take it out of this system into that system to do that. With a lot of joins, if you like, that means that your process is not efficient because your technology is not able to do it seamlessly. That's a good place to look. So the first thing is really identify where are the issues that you're trying to fix. Some of those, don't be always tempted by what are called the quick wins to try and prove. Some of them should be gnarly problems because they might take a bit longer, but they will fundamentally change. If you fix them, they will change the outcome for your business. So one is, don't be afraid to identify the problem. Second is, get a blend of problems, a couple of quick ones, that you can prove, but a couple of gnarly ones too, that really help you get confidence. Third is that, you don't necessarily need to buy this stuff in. A lot of this you can do yourself. I mean, the irony isn't lost on me that you can ask AI how to use AI to solve an AI created problem, right? So, and I sometimes I'm a little bit rude about, this to people. As I say, they say, I don't know where to start. And I sort of say, well, can you speak? Yeah, well, of course I can speak. Can you type? Of course I can. Well, then that's it. There's no barriers to using it because, you can I sit in my car, right? And when I'm driving on a long journey, I use ChatGPT or Claude, whichever one you want to use, one of the large language models, and I literally talk to it. I press the microphone button on the app, I dictate in, and I ramble. And I'll say, I'm driving, I've got an hour and a half in the car. I'm going to go on a podcast with Mark from Arkaro. I've got a number of things that I really want to talk about. I want to make sure I mention this, I do that. He's mentioned this, he's mentioned that. Give me, 5 or 6 things that I can really think through, and it'll come back and it'll read it out to me. So it's voice to voice, right? And then I'll have that conversation. And by the time I reach wherever it is I'm going, Birmingham, wherever, that whole transcript is available for me to use. Now, all I've been able to do is talk, right? Press a button and talk. I don't need to know anything about AI. So using it in that way as a strategy augmentation brainstorming tool, you just literally need to be able to talk. Conversely, you need to be able to type. And people go, well, I don't know how to write a prompt. Guess what? You type in, dear, whichever version it is, ChatGPT, there are other LLMs. I don't know how to write a prompt, but what I want to do is help me structure a prompt in a way that will do this, right? Out it comes, tells you how to write the prompt. So that getting over this barrier, that's one of the first things I say to people is just have a play, go do this, talk to it, speak to it, test it, do something that's of no risk to you, you're passionate about. You might be a chief executive whose weekend passion is making sourdough bread, right? Or you might be somebody who likes to make fine furniture. It doesn't matter what the subject is. You go in and you say, this is what my subject is, give me some ideas, or books to read, or new podcasts to listen to. It will do that. Low risk, right? So that's step 3. Have a go, have a play. 4th thing is you need talent in your business. you need to have people who are there. I call this the AI whisperer. There are whisperers in your business, right? These are people who are excited about AI, who are probably really advanced at AI at home. Or you almost force them to have a sort of a digital or AI lobotomy when they come to work because, security policy says we're not allowed to use anything other than Copilot. So, find that AI whisperer. They're probably in the middle management layer. They're probably a bit frustrated. They've probably been there 10, 15 years. And they're the people who really understand your business and are really good at playing with and experimenting with AI. And give them some freedom, or give them some, make them the people that do that quick win that you've identified. And then lastly, talk to industry about what's available out there, because there might be something that is, specific or niche or hard to do as a on your own or self-help or internal or is time critical, where somebody has done the work, has optimized it, and it does make sense to buy it in. But I would say that's the exception, not the rule. And when SAP and Salesforce and all these big enterprise platforms are all now AI enabled and everyone's got the AI on, you've probably got enough AI technology in your business already, frankly, and you've already probably got Microsoft and therefore you've got Copilot. Just use it better. And if you don't know how to use it, talk to ChatGPT and say, how do I use it better? All right? It'll make you an instant expert.
Well, on that point, Marco, can I just ask you a really basic practical question that I come up over again? So this is in the context of the MIT paper from January of 25, which said up to 90% of organizations, people are using Claude, ChatGPT, and so on in their organization because that's what they're used to at home. It's comfortable. It's low barrier to entry for most people. But there's resistance to the bought-in, forced-down, top-down solutions because people aren't comfortable with them. And I've been on calls with people, we're not allowed to record the transcript of our calls on this meeting because it's against policy, because it might be taking away company secrets. People have always had a pen and paper, and only think, what's the difference between the two? Simply, if your company is allowed to use Copilot, what simple things can they do to enable employees to use their Claude or their ChatGPTs without leaking secrets into the world?
Yeah, I mean, there are settings that you can, as an individual and at an enterprise level, where effectively you can turn off the ability to share your output back into the LLM. So it's a read only, but no write privileges. So that would be the very obvious first thing. The second thing is you can set up sort of, barriers and ways and almost run it locally as well if you wish, so it only trains on your own data. So there are a number of very practical, simple things that bluntly any technologist will be able to fix in a matter of minutes. Guess what? If you don't know how to do that, guess what you do? You type in, I want to run Claude or a ChatGPT at work. My company is concerned about this. What are the counter arguments I can take in, and how can I turn things off on your settings? And it will tell you. I mean, as I say, people will have this aha moment, and think, is it that simple? Yeah, it really is that simple. You just ask it the stuff and it will tell you. And then there's this concern about, it hallucinates and it's going to, not everything it tells me is true. That is true. Not everything it tells you is true, and it will hallucinate. But this is where human judgment comes in. In most cases, and used sort of sensibly, it will give you a very accurate answer. If we go back to, and it's getting better and better and better as more people use it, right? And the principle behind this is slightly the wisdom of crowds, so this is something I think, came out probably in the 90s or early 2000s, this idea of the wisdom of crowds, which is if you ask one or two people where something is, you get a number of answers. If you ask 10,000 people, you will get enough information that you will be statistically accurate where it was. I think the original thing was they were predicting where a submarine had been lost at sea. It's worth looking it up actually and Googling it. But this idea, of course, is that, what you've got with these large language models is effectively wisdom of crowds on steroids. You will get what part two is. We are largely have been trained to the sort of Pareto analysis of, the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the value or the facts and 20% of the things or whatever you're applying it to. And well, certainly when I was doing research for the book, and I was chatting to Lieutenant General Sir Tom Coppinger-Sims, who was at the time effectively the chief digital officer for the UK Defence, when he then went on to be the deputy commander of, I don't know, Cyber Command or something. Anyway, basically, I mean, Mr. Digital in the army, and someone you should chat to. He's fascinating to talk to. And he was talking about how, in mission command and things have changed in the army. And obviously when you're deploying and doing things at war these days, you've got a lot of training, you've got a lot of technology. But the old thing was the commanders, you had to understand the commander's intent. And then, you would sort of wait for about the 80-20 and you would go. What's interesting, he was saying, was that in an AI-fueled world, it's almost kind of reverse 2080, right? It's probably about 30-70, but you can only have about 30% of the facts, and the pattern matching and the algorithms and the AI can fill in so much that you probably get to a higher level of fidelity and a higher level of understanding with a lower level of original fact than you did in the old days of having to wait for 80% before you made a decision. So what we're seeing is, that actually AI is changing the dynamics around how much fact, not how much fact you need, but how the breadth of facts you need to get a really high guaranteed outcome, right? And that ultimately is, of course, what AI is really good at, this idea of sort of pattern matching and predicting, right? So all of that brings you into a world where actually you can fundamentally change how you think and how you deploy and what you use and how you start, right? It's a mind shift change back to our very first point, and providing that you are curious and say, what if, and I wonder if, you might be surprised how quickly you embrace and how quickly you find and start to become creative with new ideas.
Brilliant. So you are now segueing naturally into the final point of our LinkedIn commentator, who was very perceptive, I thought, and really firmed in on the narratives how AI can enable augmented decision-making rather than replacing decision-making. And I wonder if we can explore that a bit and get some of your feedback on how you might see the world to be working. We had a professor of possibility studies, Vlad Glavina, who gave a fascinating presentation. I want to get him to talk more about it, what he called slow AI. And as much as his view of slow AI, we instinctively go for the dopamine fix of a quick solution by give me the answer. And he's working with a guy called Ron Beghetto to think about giving more emphasis to AI generating questions that can inspire the curious mind rather than giving the dopamine fix of a quick answer. I wonder your immediate reflections on that type of thing.
I love this idea of sort of that slow AI. I mean, if you think back to what I was talking about when I sit in the car and I'm using AI to strategy, it's asking me questions, right? Because I tell it to. I tell it, I sit down and say, ask me questions to provoke the discussion so that it becomes a conversation rather than, as you say, the dopamine fix of give me an answer. For people who are unfamiliar with AI, the quality of your prompt makes an enormous difference to the quality of your answer. So if you were to do a prompt that just said, rewrite this paragraph for me to make it better, right? That would be quite different from acting as a editor for the Spectator, writing an article that is, 2,000 words long, on a deadline, in the style of Truman Capote, or for example, or embracing some of the findings of Jim Collins's Good to Great into the article. I want you to ... You will get a very different outcome, obviously, for that answer. So there is a thing around, AI, to answer your question, to this idea of kind of, slow AI and augmented AI and AI on its own. The lazy AI is where you ask AI to do all the work, right? Because you need really good data, clean data for it to be trained on, and B, you need to have trained it to sort of give you the answer. And what large language models have done, have made us lazy, is that you're pretending that somebody else has done all the training and done it really well. All the data in there is accurate and good, and you're being lazy with your prompt. And as a result, AI is being lazy in what it returns to you. It returns you something better than probably you could get to, but it's still not perfect. We go back to this idea of the human in the loop, where you're using it, where human experience or human judgment is, and you're starting to use augmented AI. That's really interesting, because then you're saying, what is AI better at than humans, right? And what are humans better at than AI? And if I merge those two together and put riding instructions around it, the instructions to the jockey, or I put barriers of, how things can be used, then it's a walled garden that's very different. So I don't think that all jobs will get replaced by AI. I think AI is far scarier than people think in some ways, because when quantum computing comes on and the power of AI goes on, its ability to ingest, and we're lazy using it, it will become as good as, or seem to be as good as, if not better than humans, and therefore, in theory, could replace. But I don't think that that's here right now. I mean, we're years away from that. I'm not saying it won't happen in our lifetime, but we're years away from that. So there are roles it will replace, and frankly, it should replace, because those roles were vastly inefficient or misuse of human intelligence or human capability. There are some roles it cannot. There are some jobs it will not replace. I can't imagine at the moment a really good AI electrician being able to come into my 16th century cottage and fix things in an old cottage. I can imagine a skilled electrician coming in with a whole series of robotic probes or AI diagnostic tools or things that will help him do the job faster, better, quicker, more efficiently. Again, augmented, has its role, right? There are things where, we see things like AI kitchens where, the recipes are sort of created by on demand, and all of the food prep and all of the cooking and all of the stuff are all done by effectively robots, AI enabled robots. So you can't say that it won't ever replace manual labor, but I think, we're at that sort of exploration end rather than the pragmatic at scale end. So will it replace every job? Probably not, or not at the moment. Is augmented better? Definitely. To your third point around slow AI and asking questions, that's the intelligent use of AI. If you think of AI as this incredible resource, it's the internet on steroids. It's an intelligent internet that can interact and have human-like qualities, and therefore we're more comfortable talking to it. It feels more natural. Then I think that's good, because it will promote that creativity, that curiosity, which is a uniquely human characteristic. And at the moment, excels what pseudo-humans, robotic humans, or human brains, if you like, robotic brains can do. That creativity. You can create amazing digital art, digital music with AI, and it's not that it can't be creative, but it requires the prompt. It requires you to tell it what to do, right? And then it probably gets it slightly wrong. So it requires, at the moment, that degree of oversight and interaction. So I love smart use of AI, slow AI, using it intelligently to augment how you work as a leader. Use it as a strategy buddy, use it as a diagnostic, use it. One example I'll give you, which is, I won't name the company or the individual, but I was pulled into a large multinational, in the well, let's say FTSE 250, so people can't trace it. Was asked to talk to the board about AI, and in their board meeting. And I noticed that 3 of them had iPads and sort of 4 of them had the usual, Amazon forest of PowerPoint. And I said to the chairman, so how many pages and how long did it take you to read it? And he said, well, I got it 10 days ago. If I'm honest, I haven't read every single page. I've sort of, and I've made a series of notes. And I said, great. And so what are the sessions now that you're most comfortable with, or ones you're least comfortable with? And he said, well, I'm least comfortable with this session actually around digital, what's going to happen and transform. And we've got an update and a brief on some stuff on technology, which we'll listen to or try and ask some intelligent questions. But I'm not sure any of us, maybe one of our board members is, but the rest of us are experienced, but we're not. Okay, fine. So I said, right, I've got hold of your board pack, right? And I put it in a clean area and I've ring fenced it. So it's not going outside this sort of, this virtual room. I said, right, I'm now going to write you a prompt, and I want to show you the answers and how quickly it does it. And so, of course, I wrote a prompt as acting as a board chairman. Here's a thing. I want you to summarize the key things from each of the papers. I want 4 or 5 deep insights. I want 4 or 5 tough questions. And what should I expect the answers to those tough questions be? What might the options be? What might the consequences be? And as a consequences, I want some follow-up insights or thoughts that you can then give to the executives. I said, to me, that's how a board non-exec should work, right? Read the pack, find some questions, understand the content, do that, put it in, and of course, within seconds it spouted out this. And he said, well, that's impossible. It can't have read all of that in that time. And I said, no, it is. And he looked at it and he said, but this is far better than I've produced. And I said, yeah. And it's not that I'm doubting your experience, but the process of what you were going through, you didn't apply your knowledge or insight. What you were done, you were suffered with the boring work of effectively creating summaries and insights, which in most cases you ask one of your assistants to do, right? And there was this sort of Damascus Road commercial moment. Fantastic. But the point is that now that he realized how you can use it to augment what you do, that didn't change the importance of the board meeting. It didn't change the human dynamics. What it made it was a very different board meeting around really getting to the nitty-gritty of the facts, rather than feeling that, and I've been there, you go and present to the board, they sit there with blank faces. You're not quite sure how it's been received. You don't really know whether you've hit the mark. You spent months preparing for it. It's just inefficient, right?
Thank you. That's been a fabulous session today, Marco. Thank you very much. I think you've brought us the question that we have to face. Rewire or retire is one we have to address. But at the same time, I think you've convinced me that the rewiring isn't as hard as many people might think it would be. So let's welcome it and listen through the podcast again. I'm convinced by your message to do that. And there is a place for wisdom. Wisdom and judgment exist in the world, and absolutely, so we don't need to be frightened. We just need to learn how to dance with AI by understanding what it is good at, and understanding, I think more importantly, what we're good at, and be comfortable with that.
And the wisdom and judgment you just mentioned, right, doesn't always sit at the top of the table.
Totally. That's a the inverted pyramid was a great takeaway. Thank you for that. Really worth reinforcing on that. So where can people find your book? Where can they learn more about you?
So the book is in Amazon. You can order it through bookstores, but the easiest, quickest way to get it is through Amazon. And if they want to find a bit more about me, then just go to markoryan.com, and you'll see there's a whole load of free PDFs and papers and things to download. You can see what I look like as a speaker if you want me to come and speak at an event, whatever it might be. So yeah, all there, markoryan.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And again, we'll try and get as much as we can in the show notes. And even better, if you've been inspired by any of the discussion, please come and find us on LinkedIn and share your thoughts and ask the provocative questions for our next guest. Thank you very much, Marco. If you found yourself nodding along to Marco's Rewire or Retire philosophy, you'll definitely want to explore some earlier conversations that we've had that build the foundation for today's session. Marco's point about digital curiosity and the low DQ at the top is the perfect companion for my conversation with Ray Eitel-Porter on AI governance. If you're worried about where to start, remember Marco's advice. Don't ban it, don't fear it. Just find the AI whisperers in the middle management and empower them to lead your first implementations. If you're struck by Marco's metaphor of driving a Formula One car while looking in the rearview mirror, go and have a look at the podcast with Scott Anthony, and we talked about epic disruption. He digs deep into the three ghosts that keep leaders frozen in old habits, even when they know there is a tsunami coming, as the tsunami described by Stephen Wonka in AI and the Optimus organization. For those in supply chain who are intrigued about the level of detail that we need and how we can trust the systems and the view on explainability, and perhaps something about the 3070 flip that we spoke about today, make sure you listen to the episode with Niels van Hove, a fascinating guide about augmented decision-making. And so finally, a quick test, may I suggest. Why don't you try Marco's Damascus Road moment for yourself? Next week, you've got a meeting. If you've got meeting notes in advance or maybe a PowerPoint deck, put that into a secure large language model like Claude or ChatGPT. And again, check the settings to make sure it's secure. And just ask for the 5 toughest questions you should be asking at the meeting next week. So all of these episodes are available on our YouTube. We do ask you to subscribe. We've got some great guests booked for future episodes. And please look at the show notes where we'll connect you with Marco's website, marcoryan.com, and also where you can find more information on our own website, arkaro.com. And please do share your comments on LinkedIn when we post this video. Really looking forward to seeing what you thought about today. Thank you for listening. In a world of AI, it is you and your human judgment is not just a backup, it is the thing that is the steward of the entire system. So stay adaptive. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by Arkaro. To learn more about how Arkaro might help your organization adapt to a changing world, please visit our website, www.arkaro.com. More information in the show notes. Thank you.